right, well, I think we should get started. I'm sure some more people will sort of filter in. Welcome everybody to Thursday of Pratt Earth Action Week. It's amazing how quickly this week has gone. We've been just overwhelmed by the amount of just super enriching and engaging presentations. And so I'm super excited for today. My name is Carolyn Schaefer. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Director of Sustainability for Academic Affairs at Pratt Institute, and I also run the Pratt Sustainability Center, which is one of the key sponsors and organizers of this week of events. This week, we are looking at sustainability through a very important lens. This spring, Pratt Earth Action Week will continue to focus on the ongoing and intersecting crises of climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the racial and social justice protests that have brought into relief systematic inequalities and unsustainable systems. This Earth Action Week will align with the creative and forward-thinking, solution-driven spirit of the Pratt community to focus on the theme of a just, sustainable, and prosperous recovery. And our theme this spring is to recover, renew, and reconnect. I already stuck this in the chat, but if you would like to see the full lineup and what's left to come this week, you can see the entire program on the Pratt Sustainability Center's website. In addition to all of our live virtual events, we also have an incredible student exhibit that is all on our website as well. It's fully virtual, where we had over 60 submissions of student work in reaction or alignment to our theme this Pratt Earth Action Week. I want to give a special thanks to all of the key coordinators that helped to make this event possible, and specifically for Tessa Mafucci, who was instrumental in putting today's event together, which is sponsored by jointly the Pratt the Pratt Fashion Department as well as School of Design. I'm super excited about today's event because it really looks at that word action within the title of our event. It's an opportunity for us to take everything that we've been thinking about and mulling over and reflecting on, actually be able to get our hands dirty, literally. So I'm super excited about today, and thank you so much. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Anita Cooney, who is the Dean of Pratt's School of Design. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. Hi, everybody. I'm, as she said, I'm Anita Cooney. I'm still stuck in having to say that to you all. Repeat it again if you didn't hear it the first time. This meeting today reflects and actually the sort of renew, restore, and action proactive energy around the and in amazing ways that I'm super excited about. I want to start by thanking Gina Gregorio for putting out there in her inimitable way, which is forward, direct, and out loud. Wouldn't it be great if ... And then goes lots and lots of fabulous suggestions. This one had to do with thinking about textiles, thinking about sustainability, working with Tessa Mafucci. What could we do to engage our campus, bring a sense of hope, and really teach our students in something that's critical to the School of Design? How do we engage material research, material investigation in the development of design? And so why not, while we have we were able to do 3D knits, we want to also be able to understand how to make fabric from dyeing it from the earth, from the world, from our gardens. And so she said, why don't we have a textile dye garden? And Jennifer and Gina presented this idea to me and I said, fantastic. We proceeded to start to work with the school at large, the Institute, because that requires funding. It requires some space for this to happen. We need some expertise. Isa Rodrigues, who is here, has been brought into our circle to help us with this effort. We were able to get this started through very generous, fantastic support, one anonymous donation and one from the Siegel family, so that what we're doing is called the Hazel Siegel Textile Dye Garden Exploration Fund. Why that very long title? For a number of reasons. Hazel Siegel, for most of you will not know this, but Hazel Siegel was a formidable textile designer she was a design director for textiles for Knoll for many years. She did several designs to her credit, was influential in interiors and design, and she taught in the interior design department for many years. And it was a way to mark her passing, which was beginning of last year. That at the beginning of this year, her family donated money to help us in this effort to set up and sow the seeds, quite literally, and for a textile dye garden on campus. We are going to start this as a small generative idea this summer. We are building it. We have Isa and Chris Gavlik, head of facilities, and I walked campus just on Tuesday to determine locations. We have a few that we think are really fantastic. We have plans about plants and ways we're going to grow them this summer, harvest what we can to be able to learn about dyeing, which will be done under the very able tutelage of faculty in fashion. But I hope this can also be something what's critical for all of us also is in terms of action and community engagement, is this will be something that the students can learn about, that faculty can learn about, but the community can also see and learn about, to understand how we can engage with the literal world, the natural world around us. So from there, I think I'll stop and move on to let Jennifer Minniti, Chair of Fashion Design, take over with the panel discussion.
Thank you, Anita. Hello and welcome. First, before we start, I'd like the panel to just introduce themselves. Just in line of order from the squares on my screen. We can start with Cara, if you would just like to give an introduction.
Sure. Hi, I am Cara Marie Piazza. I am a natural dyer based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work with designers, textile artists, and artists to basically realize their natural dyeing needs, whatever that may be. We have a very small scale natural dye house where we dye everything from very high-end fashion dresses to like 300 units of t-shirts. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on the panel today.
Thank you. And next, Isa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Yeah. Hi, I'm Isa Rodrigues. I'm a textile artist and educator. I've been working with natural dyes for over a decade. I first learned about them through the perspective of textile conservation. So I geek out a lot on the chemistry and the material science behind it. And through the Textile Arts Center, where I've also worked for a decade, and I'm now the co-director, I also run this program called Sowing Seeds 5 years ago, so from 2010 to 2015, in which we grew and collaborated with community gardens across Brooklyn to grow and identify natural dye materials and species through workshops too, and residencies. We worked with Cara at that time, and it was really fun. And yeah, I'm really excited to be working with Pratt on the natural dye garden.
Thank you. And Gina.
Hello, I'm Gina Gregorio. I teach some of the textile classes in the fashion department at Pratt, and we have started our textile minor this year. So we are expanding our textile offerings within the department. And you know, I just feel lucky to be at the intersection of this group of people right now. And I'm smart enough to know when I'm not an expert on something. So I'm so glad to have Isa and Cara here to really bring us further along with this, what started out as, wouldn't it be a great idea? Now it's really happening. So thank you everyone who's involved.
Thank you. And I'm Jennifer Minniti. I chair the fashion department at Pratt Institute. And I'm just really blessed to be around such an illustrious group and to be part of this project. Let's get started by talking about why this is so critical. So my first question is, why should designers be mindful about their dye choices? And what role can natural dye play in building a more sustainable fashion industry? Maybe if whoever wants to start with that one, maybe Gina, you want to open?
Well, I will open, actually. Thank you. And I will pass it on quickly. I have to say that, as somebody who has 30 years of print design experience behind me, that materiality and toxicity and things like that really didn't enter into my education at all. But as I've grown with students who are growing in their knowledge and appreciation for basically the effects of chemicals, I myself have started playing catch up a few years ago with what students were interested in, and then leaned into my own education around this. And I feel like, in so many ways, when you're working in academia, that the actual student population is what leads things. And it's one of the reasons I love teaching. Like, I don't mind being teachable and playing a peer in many ways, but I also feel like it's a responsibility of any program to take this stuff seriously because of what we know about the environmental, social issues around what's happening with the industry as it's been. I mean, the divide is crushing us. And so I feel like right now we are in a place where there doesn't just have to be an interest, but there has to be action. So I'll pass it over, I think, to Cara.
Yeah, I think, I was actually, in full transparency, I was first interested in natural dyes from the sustainability aspect of it, but also just from the pure magic of the fact that color came from plants. And I think that one of the biggest, I've been doing this also for like close to 10, 11 years now. I started in college also. So for all the students out there, my thesis year was like an entire year of experimenting with natural dyes. So, I think for me, I went to college in London, and back then, there was a lot of education around how toxic the industry was, but there was also this kind of thing where it was like, hey, congratulations, it's toxic. And then crickets. So, there was, for me, it kind of was this light bulb where I was like, okay, I'm working with plants. Plants aren't that toxic. I mean, okay, let me go back a little bit. The reason why we want to start exploring natural dyes in the fashion industry is because dye houses aren't held all across the world to standards of how they eliminate their wastewater, right? So we're seeing poisoning of the waterways around these dye houses, and then that affects the ecosystems, it affects us. People are, it's cancerous. A lot of these chemicals aren't regulated. So, and I think we'll talk about this more, as the conversation goes on, but also a lot of these dye houses use a lot of water. Natural dye also takes up a lot of water. That's something that if we are actually talking about sustainability, we have to talk about the fact that natural dyes take up a lot of water too. That's part of the process. Also, if we are talking about scaling in the old way of scaling, you shouldn't be using all natural dyes to scale. You could totally wipe out an entire plant species if a company like Azara uses natural dyes in only one of their collections, right? So it's like, I think we need to start having this conversation that, like, yes, natural dyes are a more sustainable option, but only if they are done in a sustainable way. Are we working with like plants that can be, oh my God, I can never pronounce this word, but regenerative soil. You get what I'm saying here. I see like a lot of head nodding, but I think that's important that it's like, we have this conversation around like, are we just using the same extractive methods we've been using this whole time? And now I'm going to pass that over to Isa, because I think you have a lot to say about the gardening part.
I was just agreeing with all you're saying. I'm here like heavily nodding because I mean that's been my ethos, and I know we shared that. That just because we're using natural dyes or because we are focusing on that doesn't mean that our practice is necessarily being more sustainable. Sustainable can be these very empty words if we don't actually if we don't think critically about it and put it into action. But I think with something that you're saying, Cara, that to me is really key is this idea of scaling and then kind of going back to maybe we also need to really consider the quantities that we're producing and the systems because nothing can be sustainable at that scale too. And with natural dyes, like, I mean, not only the water that it is being used to actually do the dyeing, but all the resources, land, energy, water, potentially even pesticides to grow these crops too. So projects like natural dye gardens, like to me, tend to be even more important because they establish these all like reconnection to the processes too. They stop being abstract. So it's not that madder or logwood or these materials that are coming from we don't know where and we don't know what they look like, but actually creating a relationship to, yes, seriously from like earth to material and what are all the steps or is all the labor, which is so important too, and all the other resources associated with it. So I think the conversation will always have to be broad. And I think natural dyes as an option for designers are a very valid option when used also with all the other considerations like provenance, modifying dyeing techniques too. And yeah, it's really addressing quantities. Like, do we need to be producing at the Zara scale? Because nothing can be sustainable at that scale, not even with the natural dyes. I hope that added to your question, Jennifer. I feel like we.
Oh, and speaking to scale, and Cara, I was educated the same way as an undergraduate. I attended a textile engineering school, mainly because my parents thought I should be a textile engineer. And so a lot of the coursework that I took in my early years was in textile engineering, textile of the dyeing of fabrics, the chemistry of dyeing textiles, really is what I should say. And DuPont was the biggest recruiter at the time for that program. So it was all about the same thing. Yes, this is toxic, but isn't it great that we've just created a fabric that cannot be destroyed in a vehicle? You know, that's scary. And anyway, so I moved to fashion quickly. But, you know, that really kind of describes this problem, these challenges that we have that are beyond fashion. Textiles are beyond the fashion industry. So I also agree with all of you in that, you know, there's a lot of discussion. There was a lot of discussion about this, but I feel now we are really engaged in solution-based options here, that we're participating in a way where we're looking for solutions. And that couldn't be more exciting. And it leads me to my next question, to explain to our audience how natural dyes work. So how do natural dye processes compare to synthetic and even low impact dyes? Isa, do we want to start with you here?
Sure, I'll be happy to. It's like I've been teaching natural dyeing in a couple of weeks, so it's very fresh. I mean, it's always fresh. So actually the processes are pretty comparable as far as like the dyeing parts on itself. I mean, it's the image, or a lot of times the techniques that are used with natural dyes are the same techniques that we imagine. We create a dye bath, like kind of like a brew, and we add the fabric. Although natural dyes, like the synthetic dyes, can also be used for other techniques that you would be using dyes, like block printing or screen printing, hand painting, any type of direct application techniques, which are really exciting options, especially because they use less water, so it can be great alternatives in that sense. The main difference with natural dyes is that natural dyes don't come from nature ready for you to use. Like I guess the synthetic dye you'd be purchasing as a powder. So they exist in natural dye materials, and almost every color that we see in the natural world around us is brought to us by natural dyes. They don't all work in textiles, but we have to extract them first from those natural dye materials. And that's the funnest part for me is like to figure out the color potential. And I always say to my students that everyone that, you know, drinks tea or coffee or cooks has done an extraction at some point in their life, because that's all that it entails. You're just putting this material in water and relying on the fact that natural dyes will be soluble in water. And whenever your water becomes a color, there you have it. You extracted the natural dye, and now if it will be permanent or not, that's another discussion. And maybe I'll let also Cara jump into this question. But that's pretty much the process, and it's a process that we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years as humanity. So we're sitting on a lot of knowledge from our ancestors and the dyers before us. Cara, how did I do?
I think you nailed it. I think the main difference is that natural dyes don't bind to synthetic fibers. So you do have that would be the only thing that I would add, is that, you know, we're limited in that respect. But I think that, you know, there's also, I think, an education process that has to happen in terms of like shifting the narrative with natural dyes and synthetic dyes, because a lot, you know, I deal a lot with clients, and I always tell this story, so I'm just going to tell it again because I think it really demonstrates like how storytelling is like really important with like working with your customer. And, you know, I had a customer, so a lot of times they say, is it permanent? I get this like big, like everyone's always asking, like, are natural dyes permanent? And my question is, was your Walmart t-shirt that you purchased permanent? No, you got armpit stains on it. It broke in 3 years. Like, what is permanence to us? So I think that that's also something to be mindful of, is like how you, sorry, I don't know if you can hear my puppy dreaming in the corner. He's like making weird noises right now, but like, Theodore,
I thought that was my puppy.
but there's he's like out here, it's like really having something's going on. But he, I think that, so, you know, there's something that we call like in natural dyeing, like, is the dye substantive? Is it fugitive? Is it gonna wash out? Is it gonna last a long time? What's the light fastness? So I think these are also things you have to be mindful of in the synthetic dye process as well. Our limitation of like how long the color lasts, or like the true color, is a little bit different. But I think that all can be ratified if people just start changing the framework of what it means to be permanent, you know? So I tell this story because I had a client who I was dyeing scarves for as like a white label dyer, meaning like my name wasn't going to be on it. They were just selling it and I was just doing the work for them. Forget to tell their client on the end that the pieces were naturally dyed, which makes no sense to me. But anyway, so they tell that they hand the scarves over to their client. Their client's like, these are defective. They have Mordant marks on them. Like, what's going on? These don't look great, blah, 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 blah. And then the client comes back to me and is like, we can't sell them. And I was like, oh, well, did you give them the process? Like, did you tell them that they were like naturally dyed by like a Brooklyn witch? Like what, well, blah, blah, blah. How did that happen? And then they go back to the client. They say, oh, these are naturally dyed. This is part of the variation. You know, they were dyed with like cochineal and marigolds. I'm just making this up at this point, whatever, blah, blah. And they ordered 10 more. So that to me is the perfect explanation of just like the scarves stayed exactly the same, right? Like they were, but the framework of how the narrative was told around the process changed it. So I think that's something also to be mindful between synthetic and natural dyes, is that with synthetic dyes, we're still in the same mindset of just like, we put powder in water, we sell it, it's done. It's not thoughtful. Like Isa was saying before, we're not really like considering the provenance. Like there's such a beautiful opportunity here with natural dyes to like, same thing with the slow food movement, same thing with the slow money movement, is to reimagine the way that we are interacting with material. And I think that that is exciting for the future of sustainability. And I know that this word keeps getting moved around, but like the circularity of it, I think is the really important thing. And that's where natural dyers, I think, are poised to join the circularity conversation, because we're providing a service, not necessarily a product. And now I'm done. So Jennifer, you can.
Well, I actually have I just want to follow up because, you know, Cara and I had this conversation several years ago, and it really was helpful to me, the scarf analogy. But I also think that, like, and it could be my age a little bit, but also in teaching bioplastics in the last year, sort of this like shift that happened during the 20th century, where it was like, somehow we got it into our heads that we should be able to have anything we want and not regard the cost of that. You know, I want it. I can make it. And it's like, in a way, really empowering to think like we can do it. But then what is lost in the process of having, you know, whatever we like, I need this fluorescent color. I have to have it. It doesn't come from nature, but I need to have it. And then without that questioning of like, well, why do I need that? Like, how does this align with other choices that I'm making about my work and my design and my life? So I think that it doesn't mean that I want to swoop in and say, you can't do anything other than natural dyes, but it's more like, slow your roll and question what it means to need something and what it means to say, I have to have this, as opposed to like rethinking the structure. I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying, Cara, is like, how does that live in the rest of the world and in your own life? And that slowing of the questioning.
Exactly. So slow. I think, you know, we're all very familiar with the farm to table movement. Let's talk farm to fashion and the slowness there. We know that agriculture is not just about our food systems. So what are the possibilities for developing more inclusive systems, more equitable systems at this intersection of fashion and food?
I'll pop in quick.
Okay.
So I think there's a lot here, and I think that this is also part of this amazing the I know this, I'm throwing this in, but it's part of the non-binary movement that I think is happening. Is we often really think, myself included, I was born and bred in New York, everyone. I need to do this process because I do things quickly. So like natural dyes for me are like my meditation. Like there is with agriculture, and there are so many options here for natural dyes. We can work with the waste. The agricultural byproducts can become natural dyes. We can work with growth, like the fiber shed project is something really interesting to talk about. We can, you know, growing everything from the wool to the dyeing to the, you know, working within your local watershed only. That's an option with agriculture. But I do think that we should also really talk about like waste, you know, and how we can create these like logistical systems to transform waste into natural dyes. The food industry in the city and the event industry in the city, this is not agriculture, but this is another part of these like loops that we can talk about, are ways that we can all create dye. So I think, you know, with agriculture, like we can grow the plants to dye the clothing, we can grow the fiber to dye the clothing. There's hemp, there's cotton, there's linen, there's remy, there's bamboo, there's so many different things we can grow. But in that same process, how can we partner with farms that are already doing the work to take their byproduct and turn it into dye? Because that can also create color. So I will let the other panelists kind of talk on from there too.
Gina? No?
Yeah.
I think Isa will have great answers on this. Yeah.
I mean, I was just going to jump in because I totally agree with Cara. And then within that, within working also with waste, not only thinking about the byproducts and the waste of other farms, but I mean, Jennifer, you mentioned the relations between the food industry and fashion, also working with waste being generated by the food industry and also sources of dye too. But when starting from a crop, also thinking about the regenerative potential of the crops too. And other thing that to me is also really important in identifying is invasive species. So if we are growing, or if we are foraging, if we are harvesting, how can we selectively also choose what species to focus on, which also connects to something that Gina was saying, our obsession with certain colors, and also our idea that we can get these broad color palettes at all times. And maybe that's something that the design world, including fashion, but also in general in our mindset as artists, that we can start to think more locally and more specifically to the resources that we have available, and work, I guess, within that limitation to create, I guess, a design structure that is indeed more sustainable. So the whole time you're talking, Gina, about the color palettes, I was thinking about black, which is the most wasteful, most impactful color from all the dyeing industry. And, you know, I'm wearing black pants. I'm saying like that's the more prevalent color in fashion. And we're not really willing to let it go, but in order to even have this conversation in a holistic way, we might need to adapt certain color palettes that we have and limit that in a sense, not to the detriment of textiles, but to really enact, I guess, this idea of sustainability from the design perspective too. And fashion has that power to me. You know, if 1 year is like, okay, the color of the year is yellow because you can get it from goldenrod that grows everywhere with least impact, and everyone is made to wear yellow, then it's made into a cool thing, and it changes systems in that way too. So yeah, because otherwise, I guess it's kind of what we were talking about before. Every monocropping, every extensive growing of any species carries on problems like anything else. So yeah. Sorry, I'm going in circles, but that's what I wanted to add.
Gina, do you have anything to add or comments?
Not specifically about the agricultural question, but something I think that these guys were saying, you know, with the sort of advent of like mending culture, like I think recoloring culture could go into that as well. Like, you know, bringing new life to something that the colors faded, or Cara was talking about like perspiration stains and things like that. And like, there's something to me so poetic about the idea of like staying with an object as it, you know, as it ages, like just like staying with people as they age, like staying with this continuity of like how you care for something over time instead of discarding it when it's no longer this like brand new thing. And so I love the idea that the evolution builds the relationship with the owner. The evolution is part of the history of the object. And I think we see that, you know, I have tea towels from my grandmother that I think of that way, but I don't necessarily walk into a store and buy something and think of it that way. So I think it's having the understanding of the process of making, but also the responsibility of to continue making something, even if you're purchasing it, by remaking it is really important.
I think that, I can't remember who said this, sadly, but they said, I'll stop wearing black when they make a color that's darker. That is probably not a sustainable solution. But I was really happy to hear about provenance. Cara, you mentioned that, and Isa was really keen to let us know that we probably have native plants on campus that we're unaware of and that we could use going forward in the future. And I was really excited about that. And so I'm thinking if we could talk about how this dye garden can foster community. You know, it's not only our goal to make an impact on the environment, but it's to impact our community, both within the Pratt grounds and certainly with our external community. So tell us what elements are needed for that. What elements are needed for a dye garden to foster community involvement and education? And Gina, I will start with you on that one since you were.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's very much at the core of, I think, all of our desires with this garden, is that it doesn't become something rarefied, because I think that that's the beauty of natural dyes, is that there is an accessibility, and private art schools didn't invent them, you know. we are going to amplify them, but we are not inventing them. There's no ownership here, and I think that's really important. And you know, the Pratt campus is in the middle of a community. And when I started teaching at Pratt, that was one of the first things I heard coming from the school. Like, we are part of a community, and we want to continually forge relationships with the community. And that's a reason that I really love teaching at Pratt. And so for me, like, having a natural dye garden on campus that's accessible through workshops, through projects, through potentially artist residencies at some point, that can be a bridge out to some of the 12 through K, or K through 12 rather, schools in the area. Like something like that is, I think, really meeting our students where they are as well. Like I think our students promote that thinking of community, and that we can support that in a really real way with this. So how does it work? I don't know. I am not yet the president of Pratt, so I cannot tell you, but I do know that the support from, you know, yourself and Anita and you know, even Chris jumping on board and being like, this is a great project, tells me that the school wants to share knowledge here. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that manifests.
Just to jump in before Isa and Cara, Gina, what we learned from this is that there are multiple, Anita, tell me if I'm wrong, little gardens popping up, not textile related necessarily, or dye gardens. So you're right, there is a lot of support from Pratt, from the administration, certainly from the president's office. So it was just really fun to learn about all these other garden projects that I think we'll map them out and connect them, and just be growing a lot of stuff in the future.
I think it's kismet because I also think that this, you know, I will never call the pandemic a silver lining, but I think it did bring to light like that kind of casual digital disconnect that we were experiencing before the pandemic. And now we have like a very concrete example of digital disconnect that I think calls for like real action around connection in physicality in whatever form you can. So, you know, we might not be able to hug each other, but my mom and I, when we first saw each other during the pandemic, hugged a tree. We just stood on either side of a tree and we hugged the tree so that we could hug each other. And it was like this really powerful feeling of like, we can connect through nature without endangering ourselves. I know that's a crazy story, but we hugged a tree.
It's a great story. It's not a crazy story. Thank you for sharing it with us. I'm just going to jump in and say, yes, there are other, and there might even be some of the people who are also participating, listening today, who are also interested in gardens across campus. That's been made very clear to me, for growing vegetables, for all sorts of ways. And I think what it speaks to is the, you know, everybody's desire, students, faculty, everybody's desire to connect directly with your environment, to connect directly to nature. That's why, Gina, that's a really profound story. I appreciate it. And that how can we be more active agents of our own community and better, and therefore also connect to the community directly outside the gates, and that the larger environment we all live in. So this is why this has resonance in a very direct, get your fingertips dirty way. So I'm hoping we can also tip the scale in terms of how we engage with the community in larger ways from these small steps. Jennifer, to give it back to you.
Cara, Isa, any comments on building community through dye gardens?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to jump in on what Gina was saying too. From my experience in working with community gardens and also growing or creating natural dye gardens from scratch, the part that I felt was always the enter point and the start of the conversation was through identifying species of plants that people are already familiar with and just exploring the dye potential. And that was really the aha moment. So we're not talking about anything extravagant. We're talking sometimes about the marigolds we're talking in the beginning that exist everywhere, the chamomile that you drink tea from, things that we consider weeds like dandelions, and that felt really, really magical, but also created this level of accessibility that these species, these plants are already growing everywhere. New York is a natural dye garden. Right now in the spring, you walk around and you start developing these means of identifying. And I think that was a super interesting conversation to have that I felt like empowered people beyond the just like understanding the chemistry, just like really understanding the potential, and that this was something that they too could do in their homes safely and without having to purchase anything extravagant or expensive or source any materials from other places. So that was to me always the most exciting part of, and when we would, I guess, work with the community garden that was already established, and we go there and it's like, oh, this is already set up. We don't need to bring any other species. And we're just like, yeah, explore the species you have growing here, which is also fun. We did tour that or the walk that I did with Anita and Chris. They're like, oh, there's birch trees and there's cherry trees and the roses too, and the data fields. And so, there's already a mini natural dye garden at Pratt too. So I think that to me, that educational component that is really key, and also the means or the ways that it brings people into using these materials that might not be textile people, but that start seeing the potential into other applications, or just for common knowledge, knowing more about the resources we have around us. Cara, I don't know if you want to add on it.
I think everything was honestly said. I think what's so not to toot sowing seeds is horn, but that was one of my, the program that Isa ran was so incredible, I think, because, sometimes I think we get as educators or as makers, we get stuck in this thing where it's we have to build a new dye garden, but the thing that was so incredible about sowing seeds is you expanded the knowledge, and Pratt being able to have this space people are just going to walk by and they're going to see it. Not to just speak to the beauty of the flowers, but those are talking points, right? So people can come and they can touch and they can play and just see that, I think for, even if the garden can be accessible to children, the magic that when someone relearns that color comes from plants is the most exciting thing. And I think that that's how, it's a knowledge that I think we archetypically already know, but it's this relearning, oh my God, I think, the Industrial Revolution really sent us in a weird pivot, right? And we're starting to slowly come back, and just being able to have this educational plant-based access point just to talk, I think is what's so exciting about fostering community. Because I think that with natural dyes, a lot of the feedback I got in the beginning was it's luxury, it's too expensive, I can't afford it. How are you doing this? This isn't accessible, if it's not sustainable, if it's going to be so expensive. But I think that and like you were saying in the beginning, being able to watch something go from soil to seed to shirt is so exciting. And that's what the garden does. And it makes you slow down. So much alliteration, right? So it's you're going from literally this entire life cycle, which is really exciting. And that, I think, is how communities being built. And it might be slow, right? But a kid that maybe sees the garden in June is going to come back next year, and they're going to bring their friends, and then the plant birds are going to start coming, and then it just starts becoming something that's part of the fabric of Pratt.
Well said. Well said. My last question before we give some time for the audience to ask some questions is to maybe just tell our audience, what is one easy way anyone can engage with a natural dye practice?
I'll pop in and I'll just say what Isa said. I'm going to repeat what Isa said, but it's if you cook, you've naturally dyed, so it's start thinking about the things that you have in your house. You have onion skins, you've got lemons, there's tea, all of that are natural dyes. You might need something that's going to help you set the dye. So I'll go into that in the demonstration that I'm going to be doing after this. But if you have cooked, you're a natural dyer. It's the same thing. So I'm just going to echo what Isa said.
I know. I have to second that. The first, I sometimes make fresh pasta, and I put filling in it, and suddenly I had pink pasta, and it was what just happened here? You mean I can have red pasta without red number 5? So I agree with Cara. Once you start observing the phenomenon of natural color, suddenly it's very accessible.
I mean, I always give the example of coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I feel like I'm the 0.001% of people that don't. So I feel like that's always a great parallels. And I feel like yeah, everyone can get it. Yeah, each time you make a coffee pot, you extracted some natural dyes from the coffee bean. So with the leftover, you could just put some fabric on it, and there you go, you did some natural dyeing. So we probably almost all, except me, did some natural dyeing this morning in one way or the other before you arrived here. But yeah, I think it's also like parts of the conversation too, is kind of like, I love what you're saying, Cara, about like unlearning and relearning, and just like connecting again in different ways to these practices and these materials that we engage with in our daily lives, and we just take for granted or don't even like think past just the immediate use. But those are things that were common practice. My grandmothers remember naturally dyeing with tea and mending it. That's just like a couple of generations ago. So it's still there in our making, in our DNA. We just kind of have to flex it and practice it, and hopefully we'll continue to resurface back again for future generations too.
Gina, any last comments or? Okay.
No, I really appreciate those thoughts.
Well, this is awesome. And we're going to open it up now to the audience in case there are any questions. I think Tessa might be managing that for us. The chat there. Hi.
Yes, I can keep an eye. No questions have come in yet through the chat, but I have one if we don't mind, you know, me jumping in line. I would love for, Cara, you'd mentioned about this idea of like the natural dye as a service instead of a product, which I think is so interesting. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that, especially to students, you know, in terms of how they might think about their design practice more broadly beyond the product into this like process or service in motion, I guess. And then I'll keep an eye on that and see what other folks have to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, I started my job, I don't know what to call what I do, but I started doing what I do as a service, as completely out of the fact that making clothes is really expensive, as I'm sure a lot of you Pratt students know. You know, it costs a lot of money to have a brand. And there is this, I'm going to say something a little unpopular, but I think that, I mean, we were talking about this, about I was listening to Gina and Isa and everyone talking about the, you know, the conversation that happened last night, and something that Mara Hoffman was saying, which I think she's incredible, is that, you know, there's this, we're not going to stop making clothes, but the truth is, if you really want to enter the industry, you can, like, nothing new needs to be made anymore. We have everything on the planet. Everything is on the planet that we ever need, right? So it's like, how can you can make something new with the materials that we have. So how do you think about like working with recycled materials, recycled fabrics? Like, are you, you touched on this as well, like, as a service, like natural dyes are this way to like prolong and extend the life. I think my internet's unstable. Can you guys still hear me? I just got a little, yeah. How can you prolong the life cycle of an object or a garment? And you can do that by redying it. That's a way that you can consistently have something new and unique, right? It's like, yes, my mom has given me these amazing hand-me-downs, but like, I want them to have my personal stamp or touch on them. I can bundle that. I'm also a mess. Talk about coffee dyeing. I spill coffee on myself at least twice a day. So it's like, how do we turn our garments that we've maybe messed up into something beautiful? We bundle dye them. We can recreate things. It's like this service creates, you know, a way to like have an income, right? So it's like an easy way to like enter the marketplace by like doing things for companies, brands, your friends. I
think we may have lost her.
I think frozen for a moment.
There's a great question in the chat.
Yes, well, we wait for Cara to come back. Are you back, Cara?
I'm back. Was I gone?
Just for
a moment.
For about 30
minutes. I basically just like a thing to do. So that was where I was. I'll let you keep going.
Perfect. So Alice in the chat had shared that They're teaching a fiber arts class to high school students for the first time next year, and really excited about this. And the question is how to engage with natural dyeing in a situation where they'll only have access to 2 portable griddles and can't use heavy metals. So she said it's a very specific question, but wondering if anyone can give some feedback.
I can jump in, but yeah, so natural dyeing processes don't need to happen with heat. Heat accelerates the extractions and the reactions, but you can do most processes cold. And you'll find there's like a lot of information, but one of the processes, solar dyeing, for instance, or, you know, even the griddles or the hot plates. Yeah, you don't need the heat sources can be modified and altered. And the heavy metals is, I guess, a tricky question, as in like what we considering heavy metals. The fixative or the mordant that Cara was talking about earlier is aluminum salt. A lot of our cookware is made of aluminum, so we already have it introduced, and the quantities that we use are really minimum. So I personally would not consider that mordant a heavy metal necessarily. But if that's still like a limitation, like Cara was also mentioning before, some natural dyes also don't need the fixative because they're what is called direct dyes. So onion skins, turmeric, the tea, the coffee, they can benefit from the fixative, but they don't need one. So you have options to work around those 2 limitations for sure, and still explore natural dyes.
Tessa, I had a question from actually a painter that I know who works with watercolors. I'm not sure if he's here, so I'll just jump in and ask the question. He was asking about painting with natural dyes on paper. And I know, Cara, that's something that you've done. So can you speak to like other uses of natural dye beyond immersion and bundle dyeing, whether it's painting on fabric or painting on paper or wood?
Yes, I just want to, is my connection stable? Are we good? Okay, good. Got nervous. Yeah, so natural dyes are a medium like any other medium. So it could be anything from creating a paint from a dye bath to like using a binder with a natural, like if you're someone who makes oil paints, like you can work with different oils and like raw earth pigments and ochre. It's just basically based on the way that you are creating the binder with the natural dyes. So you can work with extracts, you can make tempera paint, you can make oil paint, you can add gouache. That also does require some zinc. So it depends on the metals or the binder that you'd want to work with. Isa also is an amazing screen printer with natural dyes. So I think I'm going to let Isa talk about that and that part of the painting because she has way.
I think you said it all, Cara. I mean, like that's what you said, like natural dyes is just a medium, and then you can use it in whatever way you would use other dyes, like either to make watercolors or gouache, like you're mentioning, adding different binders to make screen printing or block printing inks. And if we think about it too, that like synthetic dyes really were only invented like a few centuries ago, and we have like these extended practice of printing and painting with natural materials. It is possible in a way, like maybe some of those recipes and processes have been sometimes forgotten, especially in the Western world, but using natural dyes for other practices other than immersion dyeing is still done like in other parts of the world, like in India and other places in South America, etc. So, and right now too, like there's so many artists exploring natural dyes for painting, printing, for food, for wood staining. Yeah, really any place that you need a dye.
There's another really great question in the chat. Clara is asking, how do we go about foraging ethically? How do we think about what is ours to take and when it's okay to take something? Especially thinking about land ownership and indigenous land rights and how to interact with the land as a person that might not have knowledge or a relationship with the land and might not have a way to give back to the land as you use the plants in local spaces. Such a great question.
Can I hop in there on that one? I think that, so I approach the foraging angle kind of the same way. I took a really incredible herbalism course by a group of people called Wild Gather, and that was like a huge part of the class and talking about how to forage ethically. And I think that a lot of the times you have to think about what the final use of that foraging is going to be. Like we were talking about scale before. You're not going to dye a client's job with something foraged because you're going to take some way too much, unless we're talking about goldenrod or like an invasive species, which Isa was speaking about before. So like, for example, mugwort grows everywhere. It's invasive. It's growing in the cracks of the sidewalk all over New York. It's upstate. It's, you know, so it's really about educating yourself to like the fullest degree about what you are harvesting. I think that is number one. Don't take something you don't know what it is. Like, please don't, because although natural dyes are natural, there are things that are toxic and you're not supposed to ingest them. So be extremely mindful of what it is that you are taking. There are books, you can get foraging guides, you can, you know, learn that, like you can read. I think that you really have to, everyone knows what their actual comfort level is. There's a lot of, you have to ask that. I know that sounds really silly, but you do need to like ask the plant permission. Like another one of my herbalist friends says, you would never just go up and pull someone's hair. So don't just go up and pull the plant, you know, you need to like have a conversation with the plant. Don't take something if it looks a little bit dead or patchy, you know, that's not the place that you go. We want to like we believe in an abundance mentality, but you want to take things that are like abundantly thriving and growing. And then you need to give something of yourself back. So that could be a song, it could be a piece of your hair. Some herbalists spit on the ground. Maybe you can plant something somewhere else, but we want to complete the life cycle. So it's like, if you're just extracting, and you know when you're extracting, like everyone secretly knows when it's happening. So it's like, just be mindful of the way that you're interacting with the plant life and like treat them as if it's a sentient creature, because it is. It might be on a way slower time scale than we are, but it's also a living, breathing thing.
Can I hop in and answer Carrie's question, or at least attempt to?
I was just going to add to this question to something that Cara said, like about just really learning about the plants and beyond even the plants, the ecosystems. Also, Clara, that was a really great question. I know Clara, I thought she was my student last semester, but I think to this education idea too, and to what Cara was saying, to not pick anything that you don't know. I've been thinking a lot about, because that was something that I've done like in the past. It's like, oh, it's fallen, it's in the ground. It's okay to take, it's already dead, and then or it's already like not part of the plant, the active plant life. But I've also recently through reading been thinking about how some of even the fallen branches or nuts are means to provide shelter and food for other species and regenerate the soil. So really learning about the ecosystem that you're collecting and taking that time. So maybe your first explorations is really identifying and then researching, if possible, talking also like with local communities that are relying on those ecosystems or are participating in it. But I feel there's not like a easy answer for ethically foraging. It is you participating on that ecosystem too is what will potentially maybe grant you permission for taking. And that can come, from all these factors that Cara was mentioning, that maybe there is an abundance, maybe it is an invasive species, maybe it's already being pruned or cut. But it's really assessed. And then the location too, you know, picking from maybe an abandoned lot, an industrial area is different than picking up from a national reserve. So which you shouldn't. But anyway, I think there's a lot of considerations that come into it.
I also just want to say too, Carrie, that I happily stole that from our faculty member, James Mendola, who organizes trips sometimes for students to go see where materials come from. You know, would that be a farm? Is that from animal farms, you know, et cetera? And just to first start to create awareness, that there might not be an understanding of how things, where they come from, again, provenance, origin, and then taking that all the way then to the final end product. This creates a lot more meaning in the work that we do. Not that we don't create meaning when we make fashion, when we make work. We're all about the why and constructing meaning there, but extending that meaning and in our approach and having a profound understanding of how materials are made and the impact that they have on human ecology and the environment, et cetera. So we'll get him more involved and continue our work with him. And he's on our curriculum committee, does a lot of great work, teaches responsible design. I don't want to think that I owned that phrase, but it is a good one, and happy to promote it on his behalf.
I mean, I think I'm just going to go out there and say that, like, my thought about this whole natural dye project is that it's like an open source thing, that it isn't something that we're resource guarding or protecting, but that we really do bring that education directly to the people who are interested in it. And then it goes on from there. So I think that you could see it as something that could be an elitist consumer concept, unless you do not follow that. Like, unless you literally make it accessible. And so I know that we were talking a lot about, like, turning this garden into, putting a QR code so that you can find exactly the information that you need from there, that it isn't something that's going to be like only for tours. It's like, no, if you can find out more and then we become a resource for the community to share more information, I think that's where my head is at. With what Isa was doing with sowing seeds is why I was so excited. Like, oh, Isa's already built a model for this. Isa has such an understanding of, like, why it's important to bring this into the community. Now we're thinking, how can we bring the community into Pratt?
And to add to that, I guess, into this idea of community, sowing seeds was very much so a community project. So I mean, I guess in a way, like, I was a cheerleader for that, but then it was like really through working with it will be like 100 plus like people that were involved, like such as Cara, such as Eugenia too, but each participant, each person that contributed to the garden, either they wanted or they just jumped in it because they're already existing in the garden. Each neighbor that was popping by and saying, like, oh, I know these species that's being used like in such and such. So the conversation. So I love that idea of open source, because that's also like very hand in hand for me, this idea of gardening and community gardens as places for learning, that there's no ownership. And it's really impossible for me to talk about intellectual ownership when talking about natural dyes, because we're literally sitting on thousands of years of already existent knowledge. So if anything, we're just like being archaeologists of something that was very common practice for a lot of communities throughout most of the history of humanity. So yeah, we're just trying to make it, I guess, more accessible and open the conversation, really. There's also so many people so knowledgeable about this already.
Right, like Pratt is in this position to be able to be a hub for.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think
that's exciting.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions, Tessa? Or
there was one other question that Gina had sort of answered in the chat, but Jean had asked if it's possible to partner with florists and nurseries to obtain flowers that go unsold, which I think was also something that Cara spoke to about partnering with like the events industry, because there's just such a huge use of plants and flowers specifically. And Jean had also asked, how well do dried flowers work for dyeing, which I think we'll be getting into in the demo very shortly, but maybe if any of you want to comment on that, and then we can kind of wrap there and take a little break before Cara's demo.
Yeah, the answer is yes. And then the answer is also, that's up to you in forging these relationships with these florists, right? Like that was, for me, honestly, like the reason why I started doing that was because I was in my thesis year of college and I had no idea how to grow a garden, and I wasn't going to make any of the dye I needed in the time to make my collection. So I was like, like I've got friends who are stylists, like I've got friends who are whatever, And then I told them what they were doing. Honestly, people looked at me like I was crazy when I started. They're like, ew, gross. No, why? These are like, absolutely not. Some people are also really weird about their trash. I'll be completely honest with you. But I think that you have to just sail past that and then, go to your grocery store. They're going to think you're crazy if you're like scooping out the onion skins into like the bag. But then when you tell the cashier like why you're doing it, they're like, oh, okay. And then they like it. So I think it's just about how, bring a sample to show people what it looks like. explain. And also Gina put in the chat, we both work with this incredible woman, Liza Lubell, who started a company called Garbage Goddess. And I'm sure that once the summer happens, there'll be a lot more of these drops. So what Liza does is she composts events and then partners with people like me, people like Gina and Isa, who have access points for anyone who needs it to come and take all these flowers, right? So, you know, it's great for educational purposes. They're great for, you know, home projects. And I'm sure there are a ton of florists in your neighborhood that I mean, if you live in the city, they're on every corner. Just reach out, tell them what you're doing. And I'm sure that a lot of people, as long as it's like convenient, just make it as convenient for them to pick up their waste as possible. I think that's the easiest way of doing it. You have your own bucket. All they have to do is you go pick up the bucket, and then you're done. But yeah, the answer is yes. And I think more people should be doing this on a small scale, and then the larger companies will start noticing and take that into account.
Yeah, I actually approached one of the churches in my neighborhood where throughout the pandemic, there was one gardener who was tending the church, and there were no parishioners, you know, nobody was going to church last year. And I was telling her that I thought it was such a shame that the flowers were going unnoticed. And then I asked her if I could, as they were dying, if I could take the flowers. And she was like, that's such a great idea, like to have them not go to waste for a whole year because of the pandemic. And so I think, like Cara's right, like once you enter into a conversation with somebody where you're saying, I'm not here to exploit this resource, I'm here to like carry it to its next place, then people really can understand that.
So true. I think that's a perfect note for us to kind of wrap this segment of the event on, and we'll take a little break, a little Zoom break, since, you know, the screen time, we all have our max, and maybe I'll just pause the recording. We'll come back around like in around 15 or so minutes, and then Cara will start her demo. So unless anyone has any final comments, I think we'll take a little stretch break and see each other shortly.
Thank you.
Right.
That is one last great question though in the chat.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. It came through right at the yes. Maybe does anyone want to quickly touch on this idea? Is there a concern with using flowers that are heavily cultivated, pesticides, or potentially probably like GMO seeds, things like that?
I want to say yes, but I feel like I can't even really speak about from even just like a scientific perspective. I'm not like enough informed about what would be the consequences. Say like would, you know, I think the same issues that you would encounter when working with produce that has been grown with heavy pesticides, and all the same considerations for the soil and for all of it. Unfortunately, even more so than with food, it's really hard to get information about when we buy cut flowers. That's, you know, it's hard enough to even sometimes get the species that it is, where it's coming from. So that information might not be given to you. So again, knowing your suppliers, try to do that that investigation work. But yes, absolutely, that would be a consideration.
Just to piggyback. You go, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say goodbye, so you go ahead.
Oh, no, I guess the thing that's hard with that is it's like, I think sometimes we get very caught in like a purist narrative with sustainability. And I think that it's really like, yes, you should, if you know that the event was like done with 1,000 spray roses that were like spray painted, no, don't take them, because that might not be good for you to be working with in your studio or at home. So yes, it is important to kind of maybe know what the event was, if you're partnering, like where the florists get their flowers from. And there is a lot of pesticide use in flowers in the floral industry. But like Isa said, I think it's one of those things where it's like, if the thing is between you working with waste flowers and intercepting something from landfill, or working with like a RIT dye, I'm going to go with the one from landfill. So I think it's just like, you have to, we're constantly being asked to make these like decisions. So I think it's just important to like think about the scale of like what the project is that you're using, and not to let that deter you from starting at all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much. Let's go have our little break, and then we'll come back for the hands-on demo, which is going to be great. So we'll just, I don't know, Cara, if you need some time to get set up, but right around 12:30, we'll get started with the natural dye demo.
I'm excited to be giving this demonstration on natural dye with marigolds. So this is I'm going to just demonstrate a few different practices, natural dye practices that you can do with marigolds. And honestly, like once you learn these few techniques, you can apply them to any natural dye. So what I wanted to start with first is there are a few rules. Oh, and also feel free to pop questions into the chat. I'm happy for this to be like a, you know, a fluid moving thing. Sometimes I can talk really quickly. So let me know if I'm going too fast, because I want to make sure everyone is like absorbing everything as we're going along. Today, because we are in the beginning of the grow season and there aren't any fresh marigolds that have popped up, I'm going to be working with dried marigolds and also marigold extract that I got from an amazing natural dye resource called Botanical Colors. So this is actually a process that you can use with dried marigolds after the harvest season. You can also work with marigolds fresh, and they make really beautiful color along with natural dyes. You know, marigolds have been used forever in Mexico. They're like a very ceremonial flower. They work also in India. You know, this is a really important color pretty much all over the world, and you can get everything from a really beautiful bright orange to like a very cool khaki green. And I'm going to show you guys how working with additives, you can actually just by shifting the pH of the natural dye, you can achieve a rainbow of color. The two techniques that I'll be demonstrating today are a technique called bundle dyeing. It's kind of like eco printing, but my like little version of it, and then also how to make a hot extraction bath. So yes, I will hop in. Basically, we'll get it going. So a few rules about natural dyeing. Natural dyes only take to natural fibers. So today I'm going to demonstrate on silk. You can also do this technique on cotton. Cotton needs cotton or any other cellulose fiber. So that is linen, hemp, ramie, bamboo, tencel, anything that comes from a plant. Natural dyes need something called a mordant. And what a mordant is it is a chemical fixative that allows you to bind the color to the cloth. Otherwise, it would just bleed away. And that's what sometimes we see with these tutorials online is they're like, oh, I got so excited. I like did all this dyeing and then it just bled out in the wash. That was because the fabric wasn't mordanted properly. When mordanting your fiber, you can work with a variety of different mordants. The ones that I typically work with are aluminum sulfate and aluminum acetate. Aluminum acetate is a much more fine powder, so I do recommend wearing a dust mask with it while working with it, and that's what we use to treat our cottons to be able to be more vibrant and poppy, and not as like dull. Sometimes with cotton, natural dye can tend to be a little bit duller, so working with aluminum acetate does help with that. I am working with today Ahimsa Silk. So what that means is the silkworm, it's also known as pea silk, got to live its whole life. So for our vegan friends, this is a great alternative to silk because it does come from an animal. Basically, the cocoons fall to the floor, they're gathered, and then the silk is reeled that way. I see some questions popping in, so I'm just gonna look down so I can look at that. Or, oh no, Gina's typing it, there we go. So the first thing that I'm going to do is show you the pigment. Now with natural dyes, you can be very folk method about it. Like I'm Italian, so like when I'm doing things for fun and on my own, I'm not being very diligent, but I'm just throwing things around. But if you are trying to recreate the color again, I do highly recommend taking notes and using a scale. These are very easy things to purchase. I work with a gram scale. Most dyes come in grams. So I would recommend if you are trying to recreate a recipe, like working with grams and not pounds. So this is, and then you'll also see the term like WOF, like WOF, which means weight of fiber. So with silk, typically you only need about 10% or less the weight of fiber in the dye stuff if you're working with an extract or a pigment. So I'm working with something called a Marigold mix, which also has an awesome dye stuff called Kamala in it, and it makes this beautiful, really rich yellow, like very beautiful, and you'll see in a second. So in here, I've already used about half of this. This is 100 grams, so I'm gonna measure out 50. And I'm going to be able to keep using this bath. So I'll be dyeing, sorry, I forgot to show you this. I'm going to be dyeing a silk blend wool scarf, and then also another piece silk long scarf from a resource that's actually really great. They're a small family farm in Turkey called the Mazi. So it's THMAZI, and they also sell natural dyes, but they also sell really beautiful cloth woven in Turkey that you can dye too. So they have great templates. So we'll put my bowl on the scale, and then always remember to tare. So we bring it back down to 0. And I'm gonna take my packet here, and you can see it's this really gorgeous. So this is the extract of Marigold, right? So you can also use your marigolds raw too. So I'm just going to enter this into my bowl, make sure I get 50 grams. All right, and that just comes all of the packet. We've used it right up. We're at 49, but that's all right. Put this to the side. And now I'm going to, this water, the thing with natural dyes is you don't really ever want to bring your water to a boil unless you're extracting color from bark. Things that are a lot heavier and denser and tougher, you will need to boil, like walnut hulls, but only for an hour. We want to respect the ingredients. So like in order to extract the color out, typically like a simmer is actually better. So that's usually around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. You also never want to put your fabric in boiling water because it's going to ruin the integrity of your fiber. So especially when you're working with silk, it's a protein, right? Like we're protein. You would never put your hand in boiling water. You never want to put silk in boiling water. It's kind of like the same principle that way. Also, it's always it's important to be mindful of shrinkage, which is okay. I think it's something that you have to just be prepared could happen in hotter temperatures. So I'm going to take my my extract. I'm going to show you guys here. It's that beautiful orange powder. This was from Botanical Colors, and I'm going to enter it into my bowl. I am very klutzy. I like working with cocktail stirrers. Stainless steel tools are really great to work with. These are really easy to clean. In the beginning, I started with wooden spoons and wooden dowels, and then they get stained, and then they transfer into the other dye pots, which is fine if you're being fun and creative. But if you are trying to like get the true color that I working with tools that you can clean down is important. So I'm just gonna scrape all this into here because we don't want to waste any of it. It's very potent stuff. And I'm going to dissolve it into the water. This also smells really good. And I'm going to leave this now. I'm going to rinse the bowl out and add more the rest in there. I don't want to waste any of it. Now, if you're trying to achieve a solid effect on your fabric, you also need to do something called scouring. And scouring is basically stripping your fiber of any of like the industry gums and oils and residues that like could form a resistance on it. So if you're looking to achieve a solid color, you always scour your you're doing something tie-dye, you want to make sure, and then sorry, Gina says the fabric should be able to move freely. So like in this pot, I'm not going to throw a chunky hoodie because that's gonna, unless I want it to look tie-dye. So in here, I can fit my scarf because it's going to be able to flow evenly and freely through the pot. Now, if you also want to achieve a solid color, you should always wet your fabric beforehand. You can either let it soak for an hour or you can just run it under the tap. I'm not necessarily going for a solid effect right now, so I'm just gonna enter it into the pot so you can see what that looks like. I'm just gonna open it up. And then I just wanna show you, like, look how, you see that yellow that's already coming. It's very, very potent. So we'll add that in there, and you're gonna wanna let it sit for at least a half an hour. But the thing that's magical about natural dye is, like anything good in life, the longer you leave it, the better it's gonna become, right? It's like wine, whiskey, cheese, things that are aged and matured over time. You kind of wanna treat natural dyes in the same way. You could leave this overnight to sit, but it should be on the heat for at least an hour, but always monitor. Oh, mine actually just turned off. So we're gonna turn it back on. These induction burners can be a little finicky sometimes. I'm gonna leave it at around 100, just under 140 degrees Fahrenheit to sit in the dye. And here is where I'm gonna do my bundle dyeing. So in here, I just have water and I'm creating steam. This is a very standard colander. You're basically trying to create a steam chamber to rest your bundles into this pot. And that's where I'm gonna demo the raw marigold with right now. That out of the thing. So can everyone, yeah, everyone can kind of see my area. We'll put the scarf to the side. Now, some dyers will wet their fabric beforehand. I'm gonna wet it afterwards. And I'll show you how I do that in a second. But here I just have my beautiful dried marigolds, and I am going to break them up and just sprinkle them all over my silk here. And then I can leave some whole as well. And there's no right way to do this. This is completely, like, in terms of the way that you lay your petals out, it's totally up to you and your own creativity. I don't know if you've noticed, but just for this panel of fabric here, I've only used about 3 flower heads. So if you're working with marigold, like fresh marigolds, I would say that 1 would cover an entire panel. So it's really a awesome dye stuff for, like, only using a little bit makes a lot of dye. I'm gonna sprinkle this all across. You can also add, you don't only have to use marigolds for bundle dyeing. You can work with a variety of flowers. You could add rose, you could add chamomile, mugwort, any sort of dye stuff you like. So here we go. And now, you know what I just realized? I forgot my rubber bands. Hold tight. I'm gonna grab a bunch. You can also work with string. You can also tie up your bundles with string. So the key is that you want to do this very, very tightly. Tightly is important. The tighter it is, the more color you're going to squeeze out of your bundle. So I'm just going to roll starting at the bottom. You can also dye garments this way too. The whole garment is covered in the flower matter. Also, the reason I get asked this question a lot is, like, people are like, well, what about the back of the fabric? That's why we're rolling it. So the back is touching the front so that the dye can flow freely throughout the entire piece. And I'll just fold this down on itself one time. And now I take my rubber bands and tightly tie the bundle all the way down and across. Oh, I forgot. I'm gonna also I'm gonna put 3 pieces of my recycled silk charmeuse in this bath as well to give you guys a little demonstration on the color shifting. So we'll just enter these pieces here. And once your bundle is all tied up, I'm going to just grab this bowl and some pretty basic Bodega bought distilled white vinegar. You don't need a lot. Also, I would recommend putting gloves on for this step if you have any cuts on your fingers, because it can be a little bit acidic. And I'm going to thoroughly wet my bundle in the solution. This doesn't have to sit in here for that long of a time. You just want to make sure that the entire bundle is wet and it seeped all the way into the inside of the bundle. So if you were doing a shirt or a pair of overalls or something chunky, you're going to want to leave it in there for a lot longer because it's going to need to get to the middle. And the reason why we're using the vinegar is because it has a low acid and it's helping us catalyze the dry dye stuff. So it's going to be able to, it's making the dye ready to be able to seep out into the fabric. So I would say that's enough here. And now I'm going to take my bundle and I'm going to put it in the steam. And like with the dye, like with the solid dye that we're doing, you're going to want to leave this for at least a half an hour. The longer you leave it though, the longer it's going to last. So for the sake of the demonstration, in about a half an hour, we're going to see results on the fabric. But it's important to, like if I'm doing something for a client, I'm going to steam it between 2 and 3 hours because I really want to saturate the piece with color and I want it to last, you know, I want the light fastness to be longer for a longer amount of time. So I'm just going to grab another bowl here and cover my piece because we really want it to be thoroughly immersed in the steam. So we're gonna let that sit there. And while that's sitting there, I wanted to demonstrate to you guys how pH can affect the color of natural dyes. So with natural dyes, you can shift the color with a variety of different materials. So salts that are either, or like very high acids will brighten or bleach the color. So that can be something like lemons, citric acid, a little bit of vinegar can shift it, or something highly alkaline can shift the color in another direction, which would be, I work with soda ash, otherwise known as sodium carbonate. And that's something that you can get or washing soda. And that I get mine from a place called nuts.com. So these are all really easy like resources that sell natural dye materials you might not think of. There's also like spice stores are a great place to source these things as well. So, and then the other thing that really shifts color, but also acts as a mordant are metals. So I'll also be demonstrating like what happens when we work with iron sulfate, so otherwise known as ferrous sulfate, or the most reduced form of rust. You can get the powdered form of it, or you can create your own out of rusted nails. So I'll show you these rusty nails I have. And all you have to take a little bit of the distilled vinegar, and that will grow, oxidize. You don't want to fully submerge them because they need the air to be able to grow and oxidize the
I think we lost Cara for a second. So I was just answering a couple questions in the chat. I think she'll probably try to reconnect. Here she is back. So there were a few questions in the chat about supplies, and
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just filling time responding to a couple questions in the chat. One of which, Cara, was about using tannins as a mordant for cotton, and I was saying that you can do that, but it'll lay on a color while it's also tan. So I don't know if I answered that correctly.
Yes. Where did I cut out on? Because I thought I had started answering that. I don't know where I got lost.
I think you right before you started answering it.
Yeah, so that you did it really depends on the color you're trying to achieve. So you don't necessarily always need a tannin to dye fabric, but if you're aiming for a certain color, you do. So like let's say you're trying to make a really brick fire engine red, you're going to need the addition of a lighter tannin to like shift the matter into that colorway. So I think that it's kind of an annoying question because it's really dependent, it's an annoying answer, I apologize, because it depends on the dye stuff that you're working with and the color that you're trying to achieve. So like, for example, if I am looking to get black, I need to mordant it twice with 2 different tannins and add metal and also wait 3 days. So it's like, it really depends on the final result you're going for. And that comes with a lot of experimenting and like recipe testing. There isn't like just one rule in terms of tannin use for that. It's really dependent on the color you're trying to achieve. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna get my little vials here. And the large one, we're gonna show you what happens with rust. This one over here, we're gonna show you what happens with citric acid. And this is going to be the alkaline sodium carbonate. So I'm just gonna take a tablespoon of each and put it in our vials here. And this is just regular tap water, nothing fancy. So this is a tablespoon of the sodium carbonate. We'll put it on that side. And now I have a tablespoon of the citric acid on this side. And then I will get my rusty ferrous sulfate and we'll put it in the middle. And when you're working with ferrous sulfate, a little bit goes a long way. You really don't want to exceed leaving it in the solution for honestly like more than 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the fabric that you're using. And then also between like 2% and 5% the weight of your fiber, because it can tend to make the fabric like crunchy and just like a little bit brittle. So you really don't need a lot. All right, we'll get my spoons. Sorry, my big apron. We're just going to dissolve all of the dye stuffs into each glass jar here. And where are my, oh, here, there. So now I'm going to take the little swatches of Marigold that I had sitting in the dye. They've already turned very vibrant yellow, and that was me not even. So here you go. You see these strips, and now we're going to put a strip in each one of these solutions. Give them a little stir. Oh, I lost mine.
It's a bit jumpy, Cara. I don't know if it's your connection.
Is it? You know what? I'm going to try and switch into the call with my phone.
Okay.
Does that work? Just so that we have that. Let me just hop in real quick. That way, I apologize. I don't know what's going on today. Of course, that's what's happening. Where is my calendar?
Oh, there's a mourning dove. Okay.
Okay. Maybe kind of a, sorry guys.
Okay, I just wanted to warn you before it dropped.
Yes. All right. Let's see. Can you see me now in the second one? I just asked to come in. Oh, goodness. Nothing would be a happy Thursday without a total Zoom crisis.
I don't think you have to worry about it too much. I guess, I don't know if Tessa.
Okay. We'll just leave that.
Yep, Cara, you're in on both your phone and your,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, good. And now of course, my tripod just broke. So that's good. Okay, wait. Here we are. All right. How about, can you guys see me if I do that too?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I might just exit out that way just because it's not. Okay.
Yep, that's great.
There we are, just in case. Okay, so if you need to see that angle, I'm there too. But while this is sitting here, now for the rust, you needed to hit the air. So I can't really see too much shift right now, but it's start aerating. It's going to start becoming a much darker color. So we're gonna let that kind of sit outside, and then you can surprised that the marigold isn't shifting with the, oh my goodness, maybe marigold's a more substantive dye than we thought. It's not moving. So this is something that happens with natural dyes sometimes. Usually it does, but here, I'm gonna go like that. And then it's lightened over here. We're gonna let them all kind of move that way. Now, I just wanna show you so far the color. I'm gonna come a little bit closer to the screen. You can kind of see the yellow already poking through. And that's only been sitting in there for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to here for a second and just unwrap our bundle to show you what this looks like.
This is the one that you soaked in the vinegar, Cara?
Yes, so this was soaked in a vinegar solution only. And I'm going to unwrap here so you can see. Can you all see what's been happening?
Yes.
So that was only, so you can get a result in about 15 minutes, right? And now what I'm gonna do is cut this up, cut some samples off this, and we're gonna add it to the dye bath so you can see how the color will change also with your bundle dye as well. So I'm just gonna snip 3 little pieces here. You can also do something called exhausting the dye bath. So everything that we just used, all these marigolds are still good to dye with. You'll get a lot lighter of a color, but you can keep using them until they become a mushy pulp. So we don't just think that this needs to then go in the compost. You can one in here. One in this one here. Now you can all experiment with using marigolds and rusted nails in your bundle. So I'm going to show you what happens when you do that as well. Oh, wow, look, this changed really quickly already. Hold on, I'm gonna pull this out. I don't know if you can see if I come a little bit closer, but just by sitting in the bath for like a couple of seconds, it started turning dark green. Am I a little too far away from the screen, Gina? Will you let me know? Right.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
we
the light is a bit.
yeah, I think we can see it turning green.
Yeah. So the iron helps by doing what we call saddening the color. And here in the soda ash bath, it's shifted to a more brown, orange, red. So I pull this one out.
So generally, Cara, would you say that the iron saddens and the soda ash like brightens?
So that's a great question. I would say that the citric acid brightens and soda ash just shifts the color. So I'll demonstrate also with a little bit of oak apple tannin what that does, because every dye stuff reacts differently to it. So you can't necessarily say it's going to do one thing or another. So with oak apple tannin, for example, mixed with iron, it's going to shift it red. With madder, it's going to make it purple. With logwood, it's going to change it into another color. So I think that it really is dependent on the dye stuff. I just saw a great question. Which baths are safe to pour down the string? For the ones that aren't, what's the safe way to dispose them? So you want to make sure that before you pour something down your sink that it's neutralized. So you can actually mix the citric acid and the soda ash together and then test it with a pH strip. And if it's at a 7, then you can pour it down the sink. We just don't want to pour things that are like highly one way or the other. And then with the rest, what I always recommend doing is pouring it over gravel or just reusing your rust bath over and over again, because stones actually help filter the iron out. You don't want to pour something like heavily rust concentrated down the sink, just because it can also mess up your pipes. The thing with ferrous sulfate is it's actually the same you would take in a much smaller dose if you were iron deficient. So it's just dependent on scale. Like a tablespoon isn't going to be terrible. It's more the like if you're working like to scale or like on a very large project that has like more than 100 grams. But yeah, so it's always just important to make sure that your baths are neutralized and hovering between like a pH of a 6 to like an 8 before you put it away. You know what I mean? Flush it. So I'm just going to show you these now because these are demonstrating the bundle dye color shift way more than the other one is, which is silly. But as you can see the difference between these two. So this was in the alkaline bath and this was in the iron bath. So this is turned like a bright orangey brown and this is turning like a darker green color. And then the citric acid has kind of faded and like bleached into like a canary peachy, like in the theme of Easter yellow. So if I just put them all next to each other, you can see the difference between all three. Natural dyes by upping the percentage of any of these in the bath. I do recommend always doing a post bath of these solutions, just so that you can, like if you're creating a swatch book, for example, that way you have your initial swatch of the color that you dyed, and then you have the subsequent baths of the modifiers afterwards. So you know what it looked like in the beginning, and then what like modifying it with 10% soda ash was, 10% citric acid, 10% or iron, you know, working with these in varying degrees. And then if you want to get even more nuanced with it, you can make shade variations with just by playing with the percentage of the modifiers within the soda ash family, within the citric acid family, and within the iron family. You can also experiment with mixing the two. So I would say that citric acid and so it depends. So like iron and sodium carbonate work really well together to make a new color, but adding the citric acid and the iron kind of cancels each other out, because citric acid helps bleach tannin and iron solutions. So that would be something I would be mindful of. You can also work with these additives to kind of create a like cosmic effect on your bundle dye. So I'll demonstrate how I do that now. So I've just folded this onto itself. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it on this. I'm going to demonstrate how to do that on the scarf and on the bundle dye. So I just take my sodium carbonate like so, and you just put a little bit on a spoon and you gently shake it. And add it to the fabric. And then I'll grab another spoon with the citric acid. And you'll start seeing kind of the color change within about 5 minutes. And then a little of the iron. When you're sprinkling the iron, don't sprinkle too much, just a little itty bit. And while that's sitting there, I'll put that to the side. What did I do with my, in here? I'm going to take out the Marigold scarf. And as you can see, it's made this like really beautiful yellow color so far. So I'm going to now add these sprinkles on top of the scarf. So what I'm going to do is take one corner.
How long do you think that was in there, Cara?
I'd say about 25 minutes.
That's pretty awesome.
That's pretty amazing to get a result like that quickly. Oh, it also smells incredible. I wish you could smell it. All right, so we're gonna do that. And
my seedling.
You what?
Smelling my seedlings.
So I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of the iron on my little fabric donut I've made here. And then we'll grab another one of the additives. So this is the citric acid. And then we'll take the sodium carbonate. And we'll let that sit. And then I'm going to flip it over and do it on the opposite side.
The stainless steel table is so
Game
helpful.
changer.
But you would recommend maybe putting down plastic, or if you have that?
Yeah, I would recommend, yes, because it will absorb into your, wood takes natural dye, so it's going to stain the wood and it's going to absorb into the wood, and then it's going to continually keep staining your surface. Or what you do is you can have a cloth that you want to dye, like your undercloth, you just keep dyeing. So that might be a fun, double up. Make sure you wash it between each one of your dye projects. Okay, so we'll do that there, and then a little. Oh, I didn't take the sodium carbonate. And now what I'm going to do is just rinse in cool water the powders on the bundle dye, because they will keep reacting to the dye in the fabric. And I'm going to come up close to the camera and show you where the marks were made. So if you can see here, sorry, the light is a little harsh right now. I pull back. Yep, there you go. Everywhere that there's brown, like here, was the iron. And then everywhere that everywhere that there's brown was the sodium carbonate, and then the dark green is the iron. And then you can see little flecks of white in there. That's where the citric acid actually bled out the color. So you can kind of use it as like an eraser almost, and get creative with how you pull out the color on your fabric. And then here you can already see on our scarf, let me just open that up, some of the effects like starting to take place with the iron. It's taking a little bit going to take a little bit longer, but as you can see, there's like little dark marks popping up all over it. So I think because I folded it, I'm going to add a little bit more iron to it on other places. And yeah, this is, you know, if you don't like it the way that it comes out the first time, you can just keep adding to it. That's kind of the beauty of natural dyes. It's one of those things where, you know, it's an additive process and experimentation is key. So like I always invite people to kind of approach it like you're like a kid making something, because I think sometimes we get a little bit caught up in like it needing to be perfect or look a certain way, and that's when they always go wrong. Every time. But yeah, you can see here that's going to start color. Does anyone have any questions about that so far? I'm just going to grab my eraser.
Looks like we have no questions yet about that.
Okay. Let me just clean this part down. So I'm going to show you now that same technique with the oak apple tannin, so you can mix the two colors if you would like to. And oak apple tannin is also a mordant, a light colored mordant too. So let me just grab that quickly. This is my Mad Hatter. Where are my? Here we go. So these are crushed oak apples. I'll explain what an oak apple is because it's pretty exciting stuff to me. So an oak apple is, I'm going to show the camera a little bit closer. It's basically a symbiotic relationship between an oak wasp and the oak tree. And what happens is the wasp lays its eggs in the oak tree. The oak tree doesn't like that and basically makes this outer shell that then in turn bizarrely protects the baby wasps. Like so it's kind of a baby oak wasp nest. And then once the wasps fly out, these fall to the ground and we're provided with this really incredible, really tannin rich dye. So this is actually how medieval ink was made. So when you mix this with iron, that's the way that they used to write all the scrolls in ink. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now too. And I'm going to take the bowl back. We're going to add this here so you guys can see. There we go. Got a good sight. We're going to add a little bit of the distilled vinegar in here. And we're going to add again.
Is that something that you would find under an oak tree?
Yes.
Wow.
So, yeah. Yes. So in late August, September is when they start falling. So around the same time as, it is something you can forage, absolutely. So any oak trees drop these. A lot of tannin-rich trees drop nut or fruit actually that make this ink. So you can also apply this to chestnuts. You can apply this to acorns. You can apply this to black walnut ink, which is really great. So those, you know how with the black walnuts, I'm sure that everyone knows someone with a tree upstate that just plunks these crazy smelling fruit down. What's awesome about walnut ink is that it's actually antimicrobial and like acts as an insect repellent because the tree contains something called like juglin that like kills everything that comes in contact with. So if you notice, like walnut trees tend to not be surrounded by other, like they have space in between them, and that's because their roots send out this like, I wish I had studied chemistry because I'm going to go back. I'm going to take a chemistry class because this stuff is fascinating, but like that also creates ink when you mix it with iron as well. So we are going to reach into we want to use the powder, not the actual nut, which I have down in here. So you can bash this up a bit, but I'm just going to grab that in here and chunk a handful into my vinegar solution. But I just want to put you can also get this powdered or you can bash these with a hammer and do it yourself, which is how mine are kind of like this too. This is the really crude, fun, raw way of doing it. And now I'm gonna add a little bit of water. And it doesn't need to be hot. This can all be done with like regular water. And now I'm gonna add, can everyone see the bowl? Yes, right? Okay. And I'm gonna add a tablespoon of the ferrous sulfate to it. And if you watch what happens, it turns black. So there is your ink. Now, if you do this, this is not ink. This would be a dye because it's not heavily concentrated. So less water, more dye stuff, more iron, darker ink, if that makes sense. It's just the water dilutes a little bit for us for it to become a dye. And now I'm going to take some of my silk here.
Sorry, Cara, what did you add to the apple water?
Vinegar and iron sulfate.
Wow, okay.
And then I'm going to just clean this off. We're going to add this
silk
to
is not more. That silk is not mordanted.
No, not mordanted.
No need, right?
Nope, because the tannin acts as a mordant. And this is also a color. So this is a mordant, this is a color, and this is a fun technique that we can play with. So I'm going to let this sit here for like a minute or two. The longer you leave this, the darker this fabric is going to become. But for the sake of our demo, we've already got a really nice, beautiful gray on it. You see how dark that became? That wasn't even in there for about. Beautiful. This is very pretty blue, gray, purple. I'm gonna put my bowl aside here. And now you can use these additives to change the color again. So I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of the soda ash on here. And a little bit of the citric acid. And I don't know if you can see already, but everywhere is white was the citric acid bleaching out the color, and everywhere that's turned red is the sodium carbonate reacting with the apple tannin solution. So again, this doesn't happen on every with every dye stuff, so to speak, in this color arrangement, but you can achieve kind of like this variety of color by playing with the different acidic or alkaline modifiers.
Incredible.
Yeah. And then as we've been sitting here, I don't know if you can see the difference in the three colors of the marigold baths that we had done before. Like this is already turned like pretty dark green. I'm going to come up to the camera because I think the light is like fading it out a bit, but so like this one in the middle was the alkaline solution. This one was the iron. Oh my God, the light is driving me nuts. Wait, if I pull back, nope. Maybe if I put it in the, can you see on the phone?
I think we can see it pretty well.
Okay, good. And then this is the citric acid, which is turned into like a very hot yellow. If I pull back a bit, maybe. I think the light's a little hot, but there we go on that side. And then Gabby asked, and will it stay or do you need to fix it? So this will stay. If you want it to, I would recommend for at least an hour with aluminum sulfate beforehand. which I did just for the sake of a demonstration that takes forever, on your silk. And then this should last. I mean, there are things that I've dyed, like, I'll show you an example. So this kimono I dyed 7 years ago, and the color hasn't changed. But like, this is an example of like the iron versus no iron solution. So for this, the collar was not dyed with iron, and the side panel is the exact same fabric soaked in iron afterwards, and you can see more flower marks show up on it. So something with when bundle dyeing, I will say that an iron mordant becomes much more light fast. So meaning it is less resistant to sun fading and sun bleaching. So that is something to be mindful of, is if you work with an iron mordant before the bundle dyeing, that will increase the life of the piece, but you will work for green, more satin palette, if that answers that question. So something dyed with citric acid might fade a little bit faster because it's an acid. And then also these natural dyes are susceptible to body pH, right? So like our armpits, like our face creams, if you're dyeing something that's like a pillow, like if you wear a serum to bed, that's something to always mindful of, and also mindful to communicate to your the person who gets the piece at the end of the dyeing.
Beautiful.
Are there any other questions?
I'm just
You can see
excited.
this was already
Experiments. This last one with the oak gall and that color removal technique is just beautiful, and I didn't know that was possible. So
thank you. Totally. Yeah, of course. And you know, the thing is, what's fun about that is you can then experiment with doing the bundle dyeing technique on top of it. So you can work, that could be a base, and then you use the marigolds to dye on top of that afterwards. And like, you know, playing with fresh marigolds and different fabrics, like the marigold leaf when fresh is gonna like bleach the color because it's highly acidic. So I think that, you know, these different techniques are really good like base points for kind of attacking the dyeing process. So you can make a hot extraction bath, you can bundle dye, you can do like a cosmic sprinkle print. There's a lot of different ways to kind of attack one dye stuff. And, you know, just with all these different techniques, if you only do a marigold bucket, you could still get like 98 different colors.
And you can also do the color modifiers with immersion techniques and binding techniques.
Totally.
Like shibori and stuff.
Totally.
Yeah. And then I mean, would you use guar gum to thicken it to paint on fabric?
You know, that's possible. I'll be honest, I am not the I don't do that much painting on fabric with the dye, but yes, you can. You can also use it on paper. So like you could like bind it with like egg whites to make tempera, or like zinc to make the gouache and the tempera. So the answer would be you can.
Yeah.
Natural dyers who are they have classes online about creating like lake pigments after the bath. So what you would do is, I mean, that's a whole class on doing that, but what you could do is you basically strain this dye so that it becomes a pigment again, and then you can use the bath again or use it to paint.
Right. So I have a question about there's a question in the chat, but I'll just jump in first and say, like, if you were to do multiple processes, obviously if you don't rinse, then you're going to get the layering of the reactions. So do you tend to not rinse, or do you tend to rinse before you do the next layer?
Do you mean between the additives, or just like if I was going to then do something else?
Yeah, like you were saying, then you could bundle dye on top of something that had color removed. Like, would you rinse between those?
Yes, I would definitely rinse between them, because if you then bundle dye and the additives are still in the steam, they're going to keep reacting.
I see. Great. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah.
Someone's asking, I'm sorry, Marie is asking, what's the best way to preserve color in the garment besides a cold water hand wash?
That's I think the cold water hand wash with a pH neutral soap is the best way to preserve your garment. And then also after you've done the dyeing, you can help set it by like ironing it with a really hot iron or like steaming it again afterwards. So that's like how you would do it also with like a synthetic dye. So like that heat also helps bake the color into the fabric.
Also less washing.
Also less washing. Yeah. That's true.
Washing. I think about that a lot. Like, you know, like how often do you need to wash something if you hang it, you know?
That's very true. Yeah. It's a lot of these, I think also like, you know, these are all really special. Like if you're doing this much of a beautiful process to a garment, you know, we definitely do want to put it on things that we're going to wear all the time, like a t-shirt and stuff like that. But like being mindful of like the application and the garment, you know, just, and like thinking about, yeah, like not washing it as much as you typically think you might have to, is important. And then for things that are high wash, like towels or tea linens or things like that, you know, yeah, building in like services where you just re-dye them after they get stained or faded or something like that.
Right. So I'm not sure what time we were scheduled to wrap up. I know Tess is still here. I'm just sort of jumping in.
Yes. Yeah.
I think
it was 2. Was
it
2?
But that was just
I can keep
for questions. And also, Cara, I mean, you've been, you know, so generous with your time with the panel and with this. So we had sort of an open window, but.
Yeah, I'm happy. If anyone has any other questions, Marigold related, like please.
Can you do a little self-promotion and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you offer?
Yeah, sure. So I do everything from being like a small scale natural dye house atelier type services. So that's everything from like custom dyeing a wedding gown to doing like a 300-piece order for like a larger upper contemporary brand. And then I also teach classes online. So that's everything from doing techniques like this, bundle dyeing, the pH additives. I'm running a class on like the business of natural dyes, actually, which was something that I thought was really interesting that my client base really wanted. I think like it's important to understand like, you know, how to invoice and what it means to holistically scale. And we touched on that during the panel. So we'll be covering that and the nitty gritty of like working with stores. That's this Sunday. And then tomorrow I am doing a feedback Friday with Botanical Colors on like all things natural dye, on all things ice dyeing. So if you have any questions about naturally dyeing with ice, it's a free resource and then you can just pop in at noon tomorrow and ask anything you might have about that. And you RSVP via the Botanical Colors website. And then, Kirsten asked, did I miss the bundle I put in the colander? Yes, that was the piece I took. That was this one that now has all the additives on it. But this was the original Marigold dyed piece. So there was that. Did I do a good job of?
You did. I mean, I think you have such a great range of resources that are really accessible. Like, you know, I do think as someone who has endeavored to like teach myself a lot of the stuff, the information that I've gotten from you and Isa has really made it possible for me to experiment more. Like it's one thing to dip your toes in, but you really can get stuck. So I think like even taking a short class with you can really advance the information. So I would just, it's not really, you know, I don't think it's inappropriate to say like you are an expert at this and that you are, you know, here for a reason. So if anybody's interested in learning more, going directly to you is a good idea.
Thank you. I super appreciate that. I think, you know, it's hard. I know how daunting it was for me when I started. So I think that like part of my mission with like teaching people and also making it a bit more accessible is like kind of dispelling myth that you're an expert before you start a craft, which I think kind of like is in the same conversation of like gatekeeping and like who gets to like be the master and like Not to say that you shouldn't really learn before you do something, but I do think that there is like that, like, working with plants is also really therapeutic. Like personally, I found that. So I think that if you're like experimenting and you want to just get your hands dirty, like being mindful of like respecting the ingredient is like super important in the beginning, but I don't think that that should deter you from feeling like you can't start. Yeah. And I know that like the breadth of natural dyes is huge and it's like intense. The first year I did this, everything came out mushy. Like it was gross. I like didn't know you can't dye with blueberries. Like I didn't know you shouldn't dye with food. Like the whole thing was a hot mess, but like that's the beauty of it. And now I can like look back on those pieces and be like, oh my God, what a disaster. But we grow from that. So I think like don't be afraid to just start, and like all of those things will become part of your swatch book. And who knows, you may even like look at it later and be like, wow, that was a genius, know? So and that's my little spiel about that.
But then that mention of swatch books is so important because, you might start now and think you're not going to do it forever, but you may find that you're going to continue doing it and stuff. It's not that easy to remember exactly what you just did. So keeping a record.
Yeah, is really important. And I speak from experience that, I've been doing this for like 10 years and I will be completely transparent with you. I only started keeping like really diligent notes about 5 years ago. So like, but that's also like not for nothing. That's your money. Like that's what you go to a company with and you have a technical file that's like a recipe. You know what I mean? Like that's your information, So that's the good stuff. So definitely keep notes. And they don't have to be all these like huge swatches if that's too big. You can do it small and you can do it within your space. I'm sorry I didn't talk about this in the beginning, but I have to talk about it. So health and safety. If you are planning on doing this at home, your dye pots are now your dye pots. So I would recommend going on eBay. You can hunt different thrift stores, things like that, because although natural dyes are from nature, when you're working with all of this stuff, it does build a residue up on your pots. Also, like we were talking about metals affecting the color of the dye, the metal of your pot will also act as a mordant and will also affect the color of the dye. So working with a copper pot is really exciting. That's like one of my favorite things to work with because it changes the color. Working with cast iron pots can change the color. It'll also sadden the tone. Aluminum pots also kind of act as a mordant. They do dull the color down a little bit, but you can do that. Ceramic pots are also a cool way of like testing out color because it's like the true color, like a stainless steel pot. You can sun dye with things by just like putting the dye stuff in the fabric in a ball jar and forgetting about it for like a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of ways to experiment in the confines of your house. I would just say that like all you need is heat, a separate dye pot, things to clean your hands like the lemon juice, gloves, string, rubber bands. And yeah, so you just keep your things, keep your cooking things separate. That's just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, and you can have a pretty small footprint. I think so you can set yourself up in a pretty small footprint without investing on it. So I think that's really helpful.
Amazing. I feel like that's a perfect note to end on, that just, go out and dye, go out and experiment. That's a sort of weird phrase, I guess. Yeah. Thank you so much, Cara. Thank you, Gina, for bringing this together. We're really excited. And as I said, this will be shared on the Pratt Sustainability Center's YouTube channel. So if folks want to revisit this as you get into the process yourselves, that will be available shortly. Thank you so much, Cara. Thank you to everyone who showed up today, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, guys. I do also have a YouTube now. I forgot to talk about.
Oh, good.
There's a free video.
Just
one, but I'm adding more
in the chat, and we'll I'll get the YouTube linked up when we share the video.
And if everybody is interested in
Thank you so much.
Following the Pratt Sustainable Fashion Club, maybe Tessa can drop the link. Mm-hmm. And We are doing this Marigold dye project. I'm going to put a hashtag in the chat so you can sort of follow us as you can see, we've been growing from seed and we'll end up with dye, hopefully a little bit at the end of the semester, but a lot more. We're going to be harvesting and drying them for next semester. So it's not too late to work along with us if you want to buy plants or start some seedlings and share resources.
Hi, Laura and Jasmine. Here are 2 club leaders. They just came on video. I think they're in the studio. Hi.
Hi, guys.
We love this very much.
Yeah. Good. Good. I'm so glad. Yeah. If you like, send me your experiments on Instagram. I'm always happy to see them. So like, tag me, show me what you're doing. We'll repost it.
Definitely want to follow up with you, Cara. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.